Remember last year when Woj said this on the day of the draft? He said with pretty much absolute confidence that he thought that the draft was going to go Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, and then Paolo the day of the draft. And then, of course, we all know that the first and third picks flipped. I bring that up to say, yes, that's an extreme example, but we almost never know what exactly is going to happen in the NBA draft until draft night. And all of that uncertainty around specifically this class is incredibly interesting to me. Now, in contrast to last year, we know who's going to go first overall. Victor Wembanyama is going to be the first overall pick, and there's a lot of things to kind of discuss there in terms of what that means for San Antonio moving forward, how they're going to build their roster throughout the offseason. That stuff we're going to talk about a different day. Today, let's start with the second overall pick, the Charlotte Hornets, because I think it's pretty well known that they are going to pick either Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, and then Portland's going to pick whoever's left over. But the conversation between either Scoot or Brandon Miller is really interesting, and we're getting reports and rumors constantly about, oh, this team is zeroed in on this guy or that guy, and every other day we get a report for either Scoot or Brandon Miller in terms of that's who Charlotte is targeting. And to me, this is a very, very simple decision to make. Either you want the dynamic backcourt of LaMelo and you want Scoot Henderson together, you want to continue to build with those guys as your franchise cornerstones, or you want to trade LaMelo, replace him with Scoot, that's also an option, or you think that Brandon Miller has the potential to become a Jason Tatum type player, as a scorer, as a playmaker, as a defender on the wing, and you prioritize the wing position the way a lot of teams around the league have begun to do so. That's the decision-making process for me, and I think they're probably going to go with Scoot because it's a little bit more of a sure thing, especially a second overall pick, a team like Charlotte that is pretty desperate to bring elite talent to their team. I think Scoot's the safer pick because he's the better player. I think he's an incredibly hard worker. There's not as many question marks around him, and I think Charlotte, generally speaking, when you look at their draft record, is probably going to go with a bit of a safer pick here. But that's the equation. That's the calculus to me, is do you go with the upside because you think, Brandon Miller can become that level player, or do you go with the safer pick, a guy that I think is more of a sure thing with Scoot, and then figure out the guard situation between him and LaMelo? And again, I would remind you what happened last year, how certain everybody was what was going to happen even all the way leading up to the draft. Every time that you see a report or a tweet or something about Charlotte's going to do this with the second overall pick, or they're leaning this way with the second overall pick, they're always trying to deceive people, smoke screens, all that stuff. Keep last year's events in mind. And then at third, as I mentioned, it appears as though Portland is just going to take whoever's left over at the third overall pick. To me, it feels like Wembanyama's in his own tier. Then in the second tier, you've got Scoot and Brandon Miller, and then there's everybody else. At least that's how it appears right now. And either of those two guys, I think Portland would be extremely happy with. I think it would be a little bit more difficult of a fit, assuming that they want to keep Dame, if they ended up with Scoot Henderson at third overall, because not only do they have Dame, but they also have Anthony Simons. And I think if they could pick right now between either Scoot or Brandon Miller, I think they prefer that Brandon Miller fall to them. But I do think that no matter what happens, they're going to take one of either Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller. I don't think any of the other prospects underneath those guys are on the same level, on the same tier. And really, for Portland, it comes down to the draft itself is not as intriguing because, again, they're just going to kind of get the guy left over out of that second tier. The more interesting things we've talked about recently, trade possibilities with them, whether it be trading away Dame, whether it be trading the third overall pick, moving back in this draft, trying to go get another star. All that stuff is incredibly interesting, but again, not necessarily directly related to the draft. And then we get to that next tier of player, that next tier of prospect in this class. And fourth overall, Houston, not a spot that they were hoping that they were going to be selecting in, but they do have some decent options here. And again, similar to Charlotte and Portland, it depends on kind of what they want to do with their offseason. This is a draft that I can't really recall something like this happening where there's so many different directions that each of these teams could go in outside of just who they're selecting in the draft and to inform who they're selecting in the draft. We talked about that in terms of the future of LaMelo in Charlotte, the future of Dame in Portland, and in Houston, it comes down to whether or not they're going to end up with James Harden. I think their pick here is dramatically different depending on if they think Harden is going to be there or not. If Harden's not going to be there, I think they're probably going to go with Amen Thompson here with the fourth overall pick because of the potential and the upside. He's an on-ball creator type guy that's got incredible athleticism, lots and lots of question marks about his jump shot, his ability to space the floor, his ability to be an off-ball player and a complementary option, but specifically in terms of let's prioritize this guy, let's make him one of the focal points of our team. There's a lot of stuff to like there, a lot of potential for him. But then if you end up with Harden, maybe you're starting to look more in the direction of someone like Cam Whitmore that doesn't need the basketball, someone that can shoot off the ball, someone that is much more of a complementary piece. And it reminds me again of a situation that we had last year where Sacramento had the opportunity to either take Jaden Ivey or Keegan Murray. Jaden Ivey being a little bit more of an on-ball player, someone that's a creator, has that upside, has that potential. In this scenario, he's the Amen Thompson, whereas they had the opportunity as well to take Keegan Murray, who's more in that Cam Whitmore mold, where he's an off-ball player, someone that can shoot, someone that kind of rounds out your roster in a real way. And the interesting thing for Houston is they have to make that pick before they have the opportunity to bring in James Harden in free agency, because the draft is before free agency. And I think we're going to get a lot of clues on whether or not Houston thinks they're getting James Harden based off who they pick at 4th overall. Now, ultimately, regardless of team fit, they might just like the talent and the upside of Amen Thompson more than anybody else that's left in the class. And that might be why that is their selection. Might not have anything to do with whether they get Harden or not. But I do think that specifically with teams at 2, 3, and 4, what they might do with the rest of their offseason, and in Houston's case, free agency, really has a lot to do with who they could possibly select at each of those spots. And then from 5 on down in this draft, it really reminds me of the 2013 class. And by that, I mean not the talent level. Everybody knows that the 2013 class really lacked in terms of talent outside of obviously huge steals like Giannis and Rudy Gobert. Like, we're talking about Anthony Bennett 1st overall. We're talking about Alex Len as a top 10 pick. Not a very talented class, right? More so though, I mean the uncertainty that surrounded that 2013 class, where someone that, like in Anthony Bennett's case, someone that could have gone 12th ends up going 1st overall. I think once we get to 5, I think pretty much anything's on the table, especially if Amen Thompson goes 4th. I think a player that some people have mocked all the way at 15 could jump all the way up to 5. I think there's a lot of uncertainty here, and no one really knows exactly what's going to happen from 5th on down. Like, there's always uncertainty on draft night. That's kind of the theme of this video. But once you get to 5, pretty much all bets are off. And what's really fun about that to me is that we're probably going to be in this point of uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, pretty much all the way up until the night of the draft. Last year, we at least knew what the top 3 was. I think we kind of know who the top 3 is going to be this year, depending on what happens over the next, week and a half or so. But I do feel like in recent years, we've had a little bit more clarity in terms of where everybody's going to fall and where each of these teams are headed. The way that the lottery shook out this year, with Portland jumping up, Houston and Detroit falling down, each of those teams bringing in new coaches, trying to take a little bit more of a leap next year. I think there's just a lot more off-season stuff that goes into the draft this year than really I can remember in recent years. We did that video the other day talking about how all these trades at the top were really the intrigue in this class, is the trades, is the movement. And I think on the night of the draft, that's going to come true. Like, we've gotten reports about the fact that if Portland is looking to, unlikely, but are they looking to move Dame, or more likely, the 3rd pick or some pieces on their roster for a star? It seems like that kind of stuff would happen on the night of the draft. All these teams are gathering information. They're all gathering intel, and we're going to start to see a lot more of these trade rumors and potential players being drafted in a specific situation rumors really start to ramp up as we get closer to the draft, because this is all about information for all these teams. They want to know what everybody else is doing. They want to know what everybody else wants, and they're going to leak stuff. They're going to put stuff out there. Don't trust everything you see. That's really the theme of this video. Going back to last year with the Woj tweet the day of the draft, don't trust what you're hearing about the draft. And I know that's tough because everybody's excited. Everybody loves rumors, trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen. But you have to understand that there's agendas behind a lot of these things. These news outlets, they want your attention, they want the clicks, and there's agendas as well for the people that are leaking this. They're not getting this information out of complete nowhere. So if you're seeing something that's a leak or a rumor, especially when it comes to the draft and the week and a half prior to it, just be a little bit more hesitant about believing it. And just kind of wait this one out and see if you're a fan of each of these teams, because we're not going to get a ton of clarity basically until any of these players are selected.